If you want to know the secrets of existence and the true meaning of life, I can't help you. But if you want some book recommendations, why not try reading the ones I wrote? If you're a fan of giant monster mayhem and anime weirdness, why not try Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1? If horror is more your style, you can't go wrong with The Occult Mafia. Those who enjoy their fantasy with a dark twist may be interested in Emerald of Maddox City. And if you're interested in shared universes, why not read all three? Hop on down to the description for links to all three books on Amazon. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and I'm about to give you mood whiplash because I didn't hate episode 10. I don't necessarily love it, I think it's still heavily flawed, but it's much better than the episodes I've been seeing up to this point. So, why is that? May as well tell you, that's why you're here. The first thing I want to discuss is something I actually haven't spoken about yet that goes over the whole series. The score. The actual music that underscores these scenes. I haven't spoken about it, and I'm kind of surprised I haven't yet, because it is really good. I guess the main reason I haven't spoken that much about it yet is because it's been good up to this point, but ever since Godzilla has made landfall and things have actually been picking up, it's actually gotten much better. This past episode, in fact, once Godzilla made the transformation from Terrestris to Ultima, we get a new version of the Godzilla theme. Up until this point, it sounded like they were basically just recycling it. Particularly, it sounded like they were recycling the version that was played in Godzilla 2000. But now we get a new rendition of it that adds a vocal element to it. A vocal element that's different from the vocal element in Bear McCreary's King of the Monsters soundtrack. But still, a very interesting way to update it. I don't know what the lyrics are because they're not in English, and it wouldn't subtitle them even if I was watching it in Japanese. But I'm curious to see if they actually mean anything, or if it's just sort of gibberish meant to sound operatic. Whatever the case, I like this new rendition of Godzilla's theme, and the music in general has been very good. If nothing else, that much has been consistent throughout. But as to why I felt this episode in particular was better, it's because it feels like it's suddenly moving with that sense of urgency again. Now the characters feel like the clock is ticking down, so they're getting back involved with the major events. And plot elements that haven't been mentioned in a very long time are suddenly important again. Like the song, which hasn't been mentioned in a long time. And I kind of figured it had something to do with the whole going apart and coming together, or inversion sort of thing, opposites becoming the same thing. Because when we saw the title way back in episode 1 and it was written in English, the title is a palindrome. And then they do 6 equals 9 in a later thing, and I was like, okay, so clearly that's important. But the song hasn't been mentioned in a very long time, and now suddenly it's back. We also get an explanation about where the Godzilla skeleton in the basement came from. It's not handled the best, it's just sort of an exposition dump where that one guy who works for the government just tells us a lot of stuff that happens, while the camera pans lovingly over shots of a little sushi bar, or whatever that place is, close-up of an oscillating fan, panning over a counter, while we're hearing all of this important information. It would have been nice if we'd gotten some visuals of what he's talking about. Even if they were just still images, I would accept that, because that's pretty standard for anime flashbacks. But either way, it feels like the story is actually getting back to what it was originally about. It almost feels like everything we've seen up to this point was just sort of a sidetrack in a way. And I'm not ruling out the possibility that the stuff we've seen will still somehow tie into the main plot, but considering that those initial elements, those initial clues, were not mentioned, kind of neglected up to this point, it's nice to see them finally come back and get the attention that they deserve. I also gotta say that I liked Godzilla Ultima's introductory scene. Now, I don't like Godzilla Ultima's design. I've said that from the beginning. It looks way better than Godzilla Terrestris, which I still don't think looks like Gorosaurus, but we're not talking about that anymore because that's gone. Once again, Godzilla just sort of blinked into that position. And I once again must ask, what was the point of the cocoon? People were saying that the reason it took longer was because Godzilla was chasing Manda and had to eat him in order to conserve energy so he could transform. But Godzilla Terrestris has been doing nothing but expend energy this whole time he's been in Tokyo, and that didn't stop him from transforming into Ultima. So does he really need that energy? I'm thinking back now to what was said in episode 2, where May was asked, what if the rule of the universe is that there is no rule? And that almost feels like that's the way Godzilla operates. So, you know, if that's the case, whatever, I really don't care anymore as long as Godzilla Ultima actually functions. But I was talking about the design. I still don't really like the way he looks. His features are just too exaggerated. Like, they took certain design aspects from previous Godzillas, put them all together, and then just cranked up the dial to 11 so that he looked as exaggerated as possible. And it's not a good look. He looks okay from the side, but not from any other angle. And that's not really the best thing to say about a design. But the way he actually functions in the story, he gets one heck of an entrance. And so far, at least, he seems to be displaying more personality than Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Earth. I don't know if they're actually going to go anywhere with that yet, given Toho's policy about Godzilla being emotionless, but I'm hopeful they're going to do something with it, because it seemed like Godzilla Ultima really was at least displaying a little bit of personality. And the other kaiju have displayed personality. I hope Godzilla does too. I also like the way his new atomic breath looks. With the rings that appear, adds a nice little visual flair to it. It doesn't really seem as powerful as other versions of the heat ray, though, considering it takes like a few seconds to punch through a building, and even then the building is still standing, it just has a hole in it now. But, you know, it still looks really neat, and I hope stuff is done with it that, you know, adds some nice visual flair. The addition of the giant Rodan that appears and attacks Godzilla, which is weird considering the Rodans were initially flying alongside him, also has me intrigued. I'm wondering if that's going to go anywhere, but we will see. However, I did say this episode was heavily flawed, didn't I? Well, there are still things that I take a bit of issue with. First of all, and this is a minor thing, but apparently Dr. Lee is okay. The last episode ended on a very melodramatic note that she was going to die and May was going to be on her own. But then we catch up with them. They're both just casually having dinner at a really fancy-looking restaurant and discussing more mathematics and theoretical science, like nothing had ever happened. So, yeah, we don't even know how she survived or why her running off to get that cat was such a big deal. She's just okay. She's not in the rest of the episode after that, but whatever. See, again, that feels like the show isn't really caring about its characters. It can do literally anything to them, and it doesn't matter. Also, once again, May hasn't really done that much. This is another episode where most of the time she is in transit. Come to think of it, May has spent most of this series being transported to different locations. It's kind of funny. It would be a running gag almost if this show were a comedy. Also, like I said, Godzilla transforms from Terrestris to Ultima once more in the blink of an eye, and it just further emphasizes to me that the evolutionary aspect of this Godzilla really was pointless. I was sitting there thinking, Godzilla Ultima has a great entrance. If that had just been where they started, with this version of Godzilla rising out of the sea, with that same music, that same atmosphere, that same lighting, that would have been sufficient. That would have been enough to really announce that this Godzilla was here, and we wouldn't have had to go through all the stuff of him looking like different monsters before he looks like Godzilla. But Toho wants to sell more toys, so that can't be helped, I suppose. But ultimately, I still keep circling back to the idea that the story really shouldn't have gotten to a point where it needed an episode to pick it up and get it back to a certain place of quality. It should have, at the very least, been consistent the whole way through, instead of starting out okay, going downhill, and then starting to go back up. And who knows if it's actually going to continue that upward trajectory. I'm not holding my breath, as usual. And I've seen a lot of people coming to the defense of writer Toenjo as a result, saying that he was limited by how much time he had to work with. He's actually a really good writer. You shouldn't be disparaging to him. And I want to make it clear, I have never said a word against Toenjo himself. I clearly do not like the way he's written Godzilla Singular Point. That much no one can argue with. But I've never said anything personally against him. I'm sure he is a perfectly fine author. He's got a career, he's won awards, he must have some sort of talent. But I don't think that makes Godzilla Singular Point exempt from criticism, and I don't necessarily think the defense that he was limited by the amount of space he had to work with really holds up to scrutiny. First of all, Toenjo apparently has some experience writing in anime before. So he knows a bit about how the industry works. There are certain things he should have known up front. Like how the average length for an anime season these days is between 10 and 13 episodes. A 26 episode season can still happen, but it's very rare. 10 to 13 is the average, especially in this day and age. So he probably should have known and expected that he was going to have that amount of space to work in. And he would have known that count up front because, like anywhere else in the world, the network would have ordered a set of episodes in advance. They would have said, all right, we are ordering 13 episodes for this series. You have that much room to tell your story. 13 half-hour episodes. Go. So he really should have been prepared, and I would like to think he was. If he wasn't, that's not my fault. Secondly, I've seen a lot of people saying that Godzilla Singular Point suffers because it wasn't long enough. Maybe Toenjo had a series that was really long and epic and would have worked great in 26 episodes, but he was forced to cut it down to 13. For the moment, let's assume that actually is what happened. If that's the case, Mr. Enjo had to make some choices. He had to go over his story and decide what parts he wanted to keep and what parts he wanted to get rid of, what was essential to the story and what wasn't. And he chose to prioritize his scientific dissertations and excerpts from college term papers over stuff like character development and natural story progression. It's his story, he has the right to pen it however he chooses, but that doesn't mean he made the right choice in terms of what he chose to keep versus what he chose to cut. If that's the case. But I don't necessarily think it is because of the third point. Let's really look at how Godzilla Singular Point has progressed. We had 3 episodes that started off very strong. You had good examples of character development, or at least hints of how the characters could develop. You had a good plot progression with introducing the Rodans and showing us how they're dealt with. You introduced the building blocks for the mystery and set up those clues nicely, and then it suddenly started to decline until this episode, in which everything we had set up in those first 3 episodes is coming back into play. So we had 3 episodes of good pacing, 6 episodes of dragging its feet and sort of starting to meander around, until suddenly it's back to running in the race again. To me, that's not evidence of a long story cut short. That's evidence of a short story stretched out. Like, Toenjo had an idea for the story he wanted to tell, but he didn't have enough to fill that 13 episode quota, so a lot of stuff had to be added, which means padding. I'm just telling you what the evidence suggests. I have no more hard evidence that this is the case than anyone who says it was a longer story that had to be sliced in half does. But, you know, looking at it with a storyteller's eye, that's what I'm getting from it. In which case, maybe Godzilla Singular Point should have been shorter rather than longer. You know, there are other kaiju series we can compare this to. I look at SSSS Gridman, which I will henceforth be referring to as just Gridman for the sake of brevity. That series is only 12 episodes long. It's got less room to tell its story than Godzilla Singular Point does, but there's not an ounce of fat on that series at all. It tells its story very efficiently, and there isn't a single episode in the run that I would say doesn't contribute somehow to the plot, doesn't feel like it's moving everything forward, and therefore would feel like it needs to be cut. The only episode I would say is a bit wonky is the first episode, but that's entirely by design. Yes, when you first watch it and you don't know what you're getting into, the first episode of Gridman is kinda off-putting. It moves so slowly that you're wondering when it's going to get to the point. Information and dialogue is repeated ad nauseum. There are long moments of silence, which make sense later, but just feel awkward when you're seeing it in the moment. But of course, by the time we get to the end of that episode, we have this big kaiju battle, and suddenly things come together in a way that makes you go, alright, where's this going? And from that point on, it never lets up. It doesn't do what GSP does, which is start strong, take a dip, and then start going back up. And who knows if Godzilla Singular Point is actually going to continue going back up. But if you line the two side by side, Gridman may not have as much technobabble and scientific mumbo-jumbo in it, but it's a better told story. Even knowing that Singular Point still has a little ways to go and the story could go in any direction, Gridman is still the overall stronger story. That is an example of a kaiju anime done very well. But then again, Gridman does have one major difference from Godzilla Singular Point. It still tells an overarching story, but it's formatted like a Monster of the Week series, where in each episode, Gridman faces a new kaiju opponent. Like I said, still an overarching story, still a tale that flows from one episode to the other to create a single narrative, but each episode can technically be seen as self-contained in a way, at least as far as fighting a particular monster. Kind of gets away from that towards the end when it gets to the finale, but by that point, it's necessary. Part of me wonders if maybe Godzilla Singular Point should have taken a similar approach. If they had gone with something that was more akin to a Monster of the Week series, maybe not necessarily exactly the same as Gridman, but similar to it, that might have provided a bit more of a structure to keep the story on track, to keep it from starting off in a particular place and then getting away from that until suddenly steering back in its direction. I don't know. It might have helped. I know it did wonders for Gridman. So episode 10 is better than what came before, but it's still incredibly flawed, and I'm not necessarily holding out for the story to continue an upward trajectory at this point. It might still reach a point at the end where I can say concluded in a satisfying manner, but I don't think I'll ever be viewing this as a series that was truly great from start to finish. And that's a shame. Well, gotta see how the next episode plays out, so, onward and hopefully upward. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed what you just saw, hop on down to the description for links to Patreon, DeviantArt, and all of our social media, as well as links for Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, and Emerald of Maddox City, 3 original novels I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.